In all the years that I've been in journalism, I don't think I've ever seen people in the media throw around this one term as much as they have been lately: dehumanization. It's coming up everywhere. In some cases, it's so ridiculous that it's being stripped of its meaning. One major news organization included someone using it to describe the experience of not knowing whether someone has read your Snapchat messages yet. You'll hear that coming up. In some cases, this word can make sense. But what if the people screaming dehumanization the most are actually the ones engaging in it the most? This happens with guests who use interviews in the news to practice two forms of dehumanization, and no one in the media calls them out for it. But it gets worse. The media itself is participating in this dehumanization. Ahead, you'll even hear how one of the largest broadcast news organizations demonstrated that it supports a form of dehumanization. But first, something new on the coverage of the pro-terror radical from Columbia University, who I told you about last week. A new analysis shows how the media has been ignoring its own reporting in order to mislead you. I interview the guy behind that analysis that includes household name agencies. All that and more coming up today on They Stand Corrected. Hello and welcome to the 50th episode of They Stand Corrected. Wow, 50 episodes in. If you're new to this show, I am Josh. Welcome. This is my podcast, They Stand Corrected, which fact-checks the news. I spent 20 years in mainstream media, 10 on NPR, 10 on CNN, where I became lead on-air fact-checker. I saw so many problems in the media throughout all that time, and I saw that lots of reporting would not pass basic fact-checking. Now that I am on the outside, I'm able to tell you all about these problems and fight to make the media better, especially at this time in which disinformation and misinformation is rampant. We need trustworthy sources of truth. And these giant media operations with huge budgets should be leading the fight, but instead they are failing. So we are doing something about that. With each episode, I send out a newsletter packed with links, images, sometimes videos, more information. I don't expect you to take my word for anything. I encourage you to sign up for the newsletter. It's free. And if you are in a position to support this show, then become a paid subscriber to the newsletter. You get additional exclusive content. I've actually shown my paid subscribers how they can access just about any news article for free legally. That is especially helpful in dropping your paid subscriptions to some news agencies that are failing you. Don't pay them your hard-earned money when they're not pulling through on their end and making sure to get you truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. I'm going to start today with this clip that is, sadly, a strong summary of some of the craziness of what you've been hearing lately. This was a journalist named John Harwood talking about this pro-terror radical from Columbia University, a leader of a group that supports Islamist terrorist groups, including Hamas. Here is a ridiculous comparison that John Harwood made on MSNBC.
When I went to South Africa and covered the unrest against apartheid, and you saw the secret police in South Africa seizing anti-apartheid activists, taking them someplace where people didn't know where they were, never really charging them or coming up with charges. And now it is not surprising to me to see Donald Trump doing the same thing with that graduate student at Columbia.
Ugh, no. Let me explain to you what he apparently thinks he's talking about. This radical was arrested, and as I explained last week, there is every reason to believe that he has violated the laws surrounding a green card by supporting terrorist organizations. It's also the case that Trump has been doing so many awful things and trying to disregard laws. So it's possible that this guy did not receive due process. As I record this, there are still things we don't know about that. We just know what his camp has been complaining. Nevertheless, there's no comparison between these things. He has a ton of lawyers lining up to represent him for free. He holds public events with his team of lawyers. He's not in a black hole. Meanwhile, there are all these people around the country who are innocent of crimes they are accused of and can't get good lawyers. There's lots of people who have strong legal cases for civil trials and can't get lawyers. But more than a dozen lawyers are lining up to represent this guy, even though, as I explained last week, it is not a free speech case, which the media would know if they just stopped and read the law. But there's something else that you just heard John Harwood do, drawing this comparison to people fighting against apartheid. The word apartheid is misused by these hate groups that push an anti-Semitic agenda. They have tried all kinds of words across decades to see which ones stick. That one they managed to make stick in the minds of a lot of people. I will post for you in the newsletter an excellent analysis by a woman in South Africa who explains how offensive and crazy that comparison is. This group at Columbia wants you to think that they're fighting against apartheid when what they're really doing is fighting for Islamist terrorism. That's not an opinion. It's not an accusation. It's a fact. And that is where we get into this analysis. Listeners send me stuff all the time. Lots of listeners are people inside news agencies who are saying to me, can you believe what we just ran or published or aired? Their bosses won't listen. I got this from someone who wishes to remain anonymous, a longtime professional journalist. The chances are you have seen this person's work. What this person sent me is from a group called Combat Anti-Semitism. And actually, in this case, even though it's not really relevant, I will mention that this listener is not Jewish and is one of many people who understands how anti-Semitic mainstream media has become. This analysis looked at several major news agencies covering this guy from this group at Columbia University. And this analysis showed that news organizations are ignoring things about this group that they themselves have reported in the past in order to give you a sense that this guy is some sort of free speech hero, which he very much is not. The person I spoke to from this group is Zach Schildkraut.
We noticed that the reporting about this group didn't provide much context or information about it. It was very superficial. They almost gave the impression that this group was basically a bunch of peace activists who just want a ceasefire in Gaza. But if you actually do some digging and look at the statements that these groups put out, they are explicitly pro-Hamas, pro-Hezbollah. They support the Houthis. They also support the October 7th attack specifically and share essays, for example, that call the attack a moral victory. When you start to learn about that context, and then you hear the media describe these groups as either just pro-Palestinian, which is somewhat of a nebulous term, or peace activists or activists that seek a ceasefire in Gaza, then you start to get a different picture.
Yeah, and in last week's episode, I pointed out that the media hasn't even looked at the law. It specifically says you can deny a green card, and that includes take it away, if the person is part of a group that espouses or encourages people to support or supports terrorism, which this group clearly does, and he's clearly a part of it. So it really seems like an open and shut case that they can take away his green card, and the media is ignoring that. When you looked at this, what you found is that in the past, these same news agencies once in a while actually acknowledged the pro-terror leanings of this group. But now that they're trying to tell a story about freedom of speech, they ignore their own reporting.
Right. I think it was in November or October of 2024, thereabouts. The New York Times had an entire article about this QAD group, and it was a good article. It explored in depth the positions of QAD. It looked at their social media pages. It examined the writings on their Substack page, and it reported forthrightly that this organization supports Hamas and supports terrorism and is quite radical. That makes the decision to not recall that information when this group is back in the headlines more inexplicable. I actually think it's more egregious because the reporters don't really have an excuse to ignore the context, right? It's not like the research hasn't been done. The research is already there in your own newspaper. So you absolutely should be recalling it to ensure that your readers have a complete picture of this student group that is central to the news story.
This is part of what I talk about on this show. Truth equals facts plus context. When you leave out context that puts something in a certain light, it is a form of lying. And this is something that people understand in other contexts, right? Like if I were to say a black man killed a white man, but then what if it turns out that the black man was a police officer and the white man was about to shoot 20 kids in a school? Suddenly that guy's a hero. Context is everything. In this case, people don't want to hear that exact same idea. That context explains something. You can tell this is not one example of one reporter failing to put something out.
We cited 4 cases. One was Reuters, 2 New York Times, 1 CNN. We also provide an example from the Associated Press that, to their credit, does provide context, even if minimal. The article had a line like, this QEd group purports to be for peace, but in the past they've expressed support for Hamas, Hezbollah, other Islamist organizations. And I think that's a great sentence. And it doesn't take a lot of digging on the part of the journalists with very minimal effort. It demonstrates the skepticism necessary when investigating these groups, and it informs readers more about the positions that they hold.
I want to emphasize what you just said, because those of us who want truth in the media are asking for so little. It's so pathetic that you had to find one sentence in an AP story and say, there you go, a great sentence. You know, these morons out there are like, oh, Jews control the media or can't deal with criticism, whatever. It's so clearly not what's happening. The attacks are relentless. Anti-Israel lies, the big lie of the left, is all over the mainstream media. And when we can find one sentence in one report, we're like, yay, good for you. This is so sad. I have a little more from him coming up. But first, it's time to dig into this whole concept of dehumanization. The media is dehumanizing people constantly. And when it comes to one very common type of dehumanization on the left, the people on the receiving end are Palestinians. That's coming up. Two quick announcements. First, as I record this, I just got back from Northern California. While I was out there, I spoke at this great place in Los Altos Hills called Congregation Beth Am. Thank you so much to the folks there for having me, and they kept me late afterward as I was answering lots of questions. I love interacting with people. And it's always a powerful reminder to me of how many people do not yet know about this show. So anything you can do to help spread the word, please do. And if you are interested in booking me for an event in person or online, you can do that through my website at joshlevs, JOSHLEVS.com. You'll see a link for bookings. Second announcement, I am now working on another Your Questions Answered, which will either be a chunk of an episode or an entire episode. The first place I'm going is to paid subscribers to the newsletter. The monthly rates right now are almost as low as the platform allows. Paid subscribers send in your questions. I'll be tackling them. Thank you. Lately, in the news, so many things are being called dehumanizing. This term is coming up in all kinds of contexts. Here's an NBC report in which a reporter in Ohio spoke with a local official about a sign that points to a holding space building. The sign says, illegal aliens here.
It's not an amusement park. Is it dehumanizing to have this here for people to just gawk and stare?
I don't see anybody gawking.
To be fair, in the video, there didn't seem to be anyone around. On the other side, Fox talked about Trump's speech to Congress. At that speech, there were family members of 2 women in separate incidents killed by people who were in the country illegally. Anchor John Roberts complained about how Democrats responded to the family members of these 2 women.
You just felt such sympathy for what they have been going through, and for the other side to just sit on their hands and not even acknowledge it just seemed to be so dehumanizing.
Meanwhile, over on CNN, guest Nina Turner, a Democratic activist, said this about Trump getting rid of DEI programs. That's diversity, equity, and inclusion.
I'm old enough to remember during Black History Month, he was there celebrating Black history. And then on his watch, he allows people to run roughshod and use DEI in a way that is debilitating, that is dehumanizing.
Meanwhile, the Wall Street Journal has a tech podcast. And in it, they were talking about this thing called half swiping, which apparently is something on Snapchat in which you read part of a message without showing the person who sent it that you've looked at any of it. And here's one teen they interviewed.
it just really felt like almost dehumanizing to me, but he did not realize he was making me feel that way. And so when I was able to tell him, hey, like, that was a really long time. You left me feeling really uncertain. He immediately apologized and was like, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. I wanted to make sure that I responded to you correctly.
I get it. To a teen, that could feel like a very big deal. Basically, this term is popping up everywhere, especially anything and everything having to do with Palestinians. Here is a clip from MSNBC. Mary Ann Franks, a professor from George Washington University. Now, she described what I was telling you about earlier, the pro-terror radical who could lose his green card.
People are being disappeared because of things that they have said. Vague accusations are being made about people simply because they happen to fit a certain kind of profile that's been dehumanized for the last several years.
In late 2023, so not long after the terrorist massacres by Hamas, NPR interviewed a Palestinian-American writer, and she kept using this term over and over.
The real problem with dehumanization, right? The really sneaky thing that dehumanization does, perhaps the most damaging thing it does, is it delegitimizes the dehumanized from being able to speak on their own experience.
She even compared President Biden accurately saying that he couldn't know whether Hamas was telling the truth about the numbers of people killed. She called that dehumanizing. It isn't. It's called truthfulness. But let's talk about actual dehumanization. First of all, the people of Israel, people of Judea, Jews, are literally dehumanized in the minds of millions and millions of people, especially Arab children, including and especially those educated in schools run by Palestinian governments. This is the kind of thing in which right-wing media are good at rejecting the big lie of the left, big bad Israel, and calling out this stuff, which the mainstream media won't even acknowledge. Here was Mark Levin on Fox in October 2023, after the terrorist massacres.
These are Nazis. This is what the Nazis do. This is what the Nazis are all about. This is what their children are being taught, whether it's the Palestinian Authority or Hamas or Iran. The same thing as the Nazis taught their kids. Jews are dogs. Jews are non-humans.
He accurately predicted what would come next. Not that it's shocking, of course. Lots of us knew this was coming.
Here we have our media giving aid and comfort to the enemy. It's coming. Wow. How many women and children have died in Gaza? How many casualties are there? So the Israelis, the Jews in Israel, we're going to rally around them as a government and as a people as long as they're victims. But if they use their own might, their own capabilities to defeat these Nazi bastards, Hamas, well, then they're the aggressor. We can't have that.
This is actual dehumanization. What Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank overwhelmingly support. Just look recently at the Bibas children. This was a baby and a little kid. They were strangled in captivity in Gaza, according to forensic reports. But sending aid trucks to Gaza, as Israel does, that is not dehumanization. It's the opposite. Israeli hostages are being starved. Gazan civilians who support taking Israeli hostages are being fed by Israel. That is the opposite of dehumanization. How about this? Israel treats Palestinians in Israeli hospitals. Can you even imagine any Palestinian hospitals actually treating Israelis? You can even look at this numerically, sadly. Israel has traded thousands of Palestinian terrorists. These are people who say they will kill Israelis again. Israel is allowing each individual Israeli captive to be traded for scores or hundreds of Palestinian people. Technically, that puts a lower value on Israeli lives. Terrorists have dehumanization and the teaching, the training of dehumanization as a core tenet of their operation. This guy at Columbia pushed dehumanization of the people of Israel, the people of Judea, the people of Zion. He distributed materials from Hamas. Now let's switch out of this for a second and look at something. A lot of people who condemn Trump point out that Trump likes to accuse other people of lying while Trump himself is lying. Critics say that's projection. And maybe it is, depending on how often Trump even realizes that he's lying. Who knows how deep his denial on a lot of things goes. But take that principle. Pro-Hamas protesters and people supporting these folks, when they scream that the other side is engaging in dehumanization, That is the same thing. That is them projecting just as much. Who knows how much denial they are in? Dehumanization is probably the key thought process that serves as the driving force of Islamist hatred and Islamist terrorism. This is the world we live in. It's real. And if you're thinking, well, both sides do it, that's both sidesism. You can always find individuals. Both sidesism is pretending that it's equal. If that's your thought process, then I encourage you to go back and listen to the facts I just cited. And here are some more. Palestinian governments pay people and their families to bomb Israeli civilians. Israel has laws against that and has arrested and punished Jewish people who engaged in acts of terrorism. If you can see both sidesism in U.S. politics, you should be able to see it on this issue as well. And I know that for some people, this has gotten really hard to see. That's what the mainstream media has done to so many people. It has clouded people's minds with lies. But these are facts. And that is just a piece of it. There is a whole other type of dehumanization to look at now. It's called infantilization, treating someone like they are an infant, which is the only kind of human being not responsible for their actions. Good parents start teaching kids at a pretty early age when they're old enough to understand that they have to follow certain behaviors. And if they don't, there are consequences because they're responsible for their choices. Infants cannot be taught that. That's why it's infantilization. The world openly infantilizes Palestinians, constantly saying that they are never responsible for any of their own decisions, even though hundreds of millions of people lost everything in the 20th century and built new lives and moved on. This one group of people has built an identity around aggrieved victimhood. People on the far left support that, saying that they literally support them unconditionally, absolute solidarity with anything they do. That carte blanche, that's what infantilization is. And this is a form of dehumanization because it treats some people as not being fully adult humans. I looked to see whether anyone has discussed this in the media. There are a few examples. On the British network GBN, Yosef David, a political commentator, said this to a fellow guest who was spouting Hamas propaganda.
You haven't said one thing about what Hamas have said. It's as if they don't exist to you. And this is, I'm sorry, but it's a trademark of the left to infantilize the Palestinians, pretend that nothing that Hamas does has any value or can do any harm.
Of course, the other guest went right back into Hamas talking points, and what a shock. That other guest is a former advisor to Jeremy Corbyn. He's a British politician who is one of the biggest symbols of global left-wing anti-Semitism. There was a good article about infantilization. This was in the Jerusalem Post. It discussed a study from a group called Impact SE. In this clip, you'll hear a reference to the CEO of that group. His name is Marcus Sheff.
Sheff calls on Norway, Finland, Germany, Ireland, and other nations that support the Palestinian education system to review their policies. This is infantilization of Palestinians, concluded Sheff.
It is, by definition. The media engages in this form of dehumanization all the time, infantilizing people who identify as Palestinians. Here was an example that really struck me. Earlier, I played you a clip of an interview with a Palestinian American writer. Well, in setting up this interview, host Layla Fadel said this about the woman she was about to interview.
Hannah Adyan recognized something familiar. Media coverage of the bloodshed and suffering in the besieged Gaza Strip was once again painting the lives of Palestinians in broad strokes, a faceless people, somehow complicit in their own suffering.
Let's break that down. The faces of Palestinian people are all over the media, far more than the hundreds of thousands of people killed in Yemen, killed in Syria, the estimated 600,000 civilians killed in Ethiopia in war this decade, far more than the Christians being slaughtered by Islamist terrorists across Africa. Forget faceless, they're just not even there at all. The faces of Palestinian people are constantly in the news. But let's move past faceless and into these words she said next. Complicit in their own suffering. Those words are so striking. To NPR, that seems like a sensible thing to say. It isn't, obviously. Of course, Palestinians are complicit. People in Gaza overwhelmingly support terrorism. slaughter of innocent civilians. They celebrate it with candy and fireworks. They cheer for it. They support Hamas. It always takes critical mass to get rid of an evil terrorist regime. Palestinians support it. Of course they have complicity in where things are for them. It's pure infantilization to pretend otherwise. The victims who were killed in Israel on October 7th are not complicit because they were not off supporting terrorist groups. These were Jewish, Arab, and other people just going about their business, celebrating life. The people at the kibbutz, they were these peaceniks trying to help improve life for people of Gaza. People in Gaza chose this instead and continue choosing this. But to NPR, the concept that Palestinians could have any complicity in their suffering is gasp, unthinkable. And yes, people have responsibilities for what their militaries do, which is why there are democratic structures in place to hold to account anyone who commits an atrocity while serving in the military. These two things are not the same. And Israelis are not denying responsibility for what their military does, not at all. In that one phrase, NPR showed its cards. I discussed last week how the media likes to go by Webster's dictionary. Well, Webster's says complicity is association or participation in or as if in a wrongful act. People in Gaza overwhelmingly associate themselves with the actions of Hamas through their support, through their celebrations. To say anything else is to infantilize. I'll be right back. Here's a very cool and free way to support this show at just about all times, thanks to sponsored partnerships. I have links for you to check out. It might be to learn about an organization, or sign a petition, or register to attend a free event for limited blocks of time. If you click those links and take whatever action that is, a little bit of money comes to this show. So you're not only learning about or participating in something really important, you're also supporting They Stand Corrected. To find those links, check out the show notes or the newsletter, which you can find at joshlebs.com/newsletter. You can also follow me on Instagram. A lot of the links are there too. Earlier, you heard from Zach Schildkraut. He's research and data manager at the Combat Anti-Semitism movement. Here's another little piece of what he said.
And it's very important that the facts are out there about the enemies that Israel is fighting, specifically Hamas, Hezbollah, and their genocidal ideologies. And the media needs to be forthright about people who support these groups. Really, the media just needs to be honest that there are people that support these groups. When they're reporting on these people, be honest.
See, it's so simple. What we need from the media: accuracy, honesty, the truth, which equals facts plus context. And we are seeing the failures to provide that yet again in the way the media right now has been handling these alleged death tolls from Gaza. I've done episodes about this, and I will link to them in the show notes and the newsletter. But the short version here, all the numbers from Gaza are from Hamas. None of them are trustworthy. Some people try to justify them by saying, oh, there are scientific studies claiming they're legit. I looked into those studies. I reported on them. No, we cannot trust those figures. And either way, the media is not telling you about wars around the world, including ongoing wars with astronomically huger death tolls and civilian ratios. It is an obsession with anything they can complain about when it comes to Israel while ignoring the whole rest of the world. I would love to hear what you think about this and about everything I talk about on this show. There are two great ways to reach me. The best is to become a paid subscriber to the newsletter, as you heard earlier. And another way, there is a form at my website that anyone can fill out. And it's a really cool form. It sends you a code that's uniquely yours. And that helps make sure that your form gets through to me. You'll find it at joshlebs.com. As always, thank you so much for listening. I will see you next week. Before you go, one quick idea. Think of someone you know who might be particularly interested in this episode. Click the share button and send this episode to that person saying, I really think you should listen to this episode. In this era in which people are so overwhelmed with content from the moment they get up to the moment they go to sleep, getting a note from someone they know, saying, I think you specifically would find this interesting, that is often the most impactful thing to help people discover this show. Thank you.